Because I'm still doing this. Okay, anyway, it's fine. Right. Hello and welcome to Eve's Apple Radio, where we talk about the things that we want to talk about. We're talking about politics, love, health, joy, culture, music, everything and anything. This is a love letter from us to Africa and the diaspora. And today we are joined by Candice Chirwa, who you will know as the Minister of Menstruation. But Candice is not just a average minister, writer, okay? Founder of Curate, an award-winning NGO in South Africa. TED speaker, okay? Please, and currently uh, doing a PhD, and so soon it will be Dr. Minister to you.
Yeah.
Welcome, Candice.
Welcome, ministerial greetings. I am so delighted to be here. I think whenever there's an opportunity to talk about anything sexually health, reproductive health, I am always keen to just lend my voice and also just lend my experience as well. So yeah, I'm excited. Thank you for
I am
having me.
excited. Before we started recording, I was telling her that she's our first, on the
Yes.
radio. On
So
the
excited.
radio. So, quick fire, right?
Hmm.
What is the one thing that you think is taboo and shouldn't be taboo?
Six.
Right. What is something insane that you've done in the name of pleasure?
Wow. The fact that I have to think about this is a problem. Wow. I mean, as a
Also,
Catholic,
no, wait. Before you even answer that question, when I say pleasure, I mean across the board, right? Because
oh,
sometimes
across the
when we
board.
speak
Honest,
about pleasure, we go to that one
yeah,
place. But like,
yeah.
yeah,
I think removing the guilt around
yeah.
pleasure, that has been such a liberating thing for me, and realizing that it is a pleasurable thing. And yeah, I'm so excited that I have come across the journey of understanding what it is to be, but also practicing it. Because it's one thing learning the theory, but it's one thing when you're practicing, right? So
Theory
yeah, I
in
think
practice.
liberating myself and demystifying all those things I used to have as a high school Catholic girl and being like, actually, I'm all good. I'm fine. Jesus still loves me.
Always,
Yeah. Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
always. Very
Yeah.
cool. Okay. I think the big one around guilt, even for things that exist naturally, really is something that we're going to have a moment to speak about because today we're
Yeah.
speaking about menstruation. We're speaking about the fact that menstruation is more than just blood, and also it actually is in real life, not just in framing, right? But I wanted to
Yeah.
find out for you, when did you decide that this is your life's work? This is part of the journey that you're going to take,
Mm.
making sure that menstrual access, menstrual understanding, menstrual awareness, and in different parts exists, and people can have a benefit of it, at least spotlight it.
Mm. The thing is, I think I obviously knew when I launched Curate, and that was at the age of 22,
Yeah.
that that was going to be something that I would carry through advocacy, something that I carry through the workshops. And it's interesting because, like, when my first period came, I just didn't like it. I hated it. I was terrified. I just, I always just wanted to hide every month my period came. So it was really interesting that then I'm now spent into this universe as the Minister of Menstruation, and
Yeah.
allowing myself the opportunity that I wasn't given to allow young girls in particular, menstruators, to feel open and comfortable and empowered about their periods. So definitely when I started and formed Curate, which was in 2018, so that was like, yeah, when I was 21, 22, and I then realized that as the momentum was picking up regarding the booking of these workshops that I was like, oh, this is something. This is a movement. We're building something here. And I
Yes.
think you remember when it was, yeah, I can't remember the year, but I think you were there in 2018 when we were having
Yeah.
like a presentation or discussion or an event, and we're talking about different sexual and reproductive health issues. And honestly, that was the first time I had spoken about menstrual health. That was the first
Are
time
you
I'd spoken
kidding?
about poverty to an audience. And from there was when we got our first workshop booking from that event, right? So that is just a little thing of like, you never know who's listening. Always continue sharing your work that you're passionate about. But for me,
Yeah.
it was that moment of like experimenting and testing out to see like, where's this going to take me? So launching that was like a mini launch of like, we're doing this, we want to do
Hmm.
something, and then rocket shipping to what it is. It really is a full circle moment, right?
It is a full
Um,
circle moment because I'm like you saying that was your first because I was like, come through to the event, let's do this thing. And today I'm
hmm.
like, come through to the event, let's do this thing.
I mean, there was things that I was learning through my research, and there was like small little
Sure.
things I'd think about, and I'll be speaking to people on it, and then I'll be like tweeting a lot about it.
Yeah.
But that event was the first time I was given the opportunity to just showcase what period poverty is, and then also
Mm,
showcase what curate is, and then also showcase the workshops we have. So
mm,
no one prior to that had even known about the workshops. No one had even known about what Curate was. It was then when we launched it and we're like, this is it. This is where we're going.
mm.
And yeah, that was a really interesting time because from then just back to back bookings were coming in, and obviously pro bono, right? Because I'm
Yes.
experimenting something. I want to see if it works, and it did. And it's really
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
And I just want to say well done because we take for granted that access to information about menstruation and periods is
Mm.
is easy and it's out there.
Yeah.
But it matters the most how it's packaged, right? Because
Yeah.
then the person who it's intended for is able to receive
Mm.
it. But as we were speaking about it, you used a word that isn't generally used, and you
Mm.
said menstruators. So talk,
Yeah.
why is that a word? What is that about?
The word menstruators gets so much backlash, even from women and females. But it is honestly really important to realize the power of language and
Yeah.
how it can change perception on a thing. I always say this: menstruation is not a gendered thing, and society still views menstruation as a gendered thing. It needs to be captured as a natural biological function, right? Purely
Yes.
because there are individuals who do menstruate that do not identify as women and girls, and there are individuals who menstruate that are trans and intersex who menstruate. And then you get into the very difficult conversations where people are like, oh, so people are bleeding out of their penises. It's like, no, we don't. Now we need to have conversations about the difference between gender and sex and non-binary. Like, it takes you to a different conversation, right? But I think for me, it's a matter of being inclusive because I always say this, like, if your feminism is not inclusive, I don't want it. And it needs to speak to menstrual activism as well. If it's not inclusive in sharing insights and experiences, if it's not inclusive in bridging the way in terms of healthcare and how healthcare needs to be more inclusive in supporting menstruators, then I don't want it. And I just really want people to understand that when you research the term menstruators, also research the lived experiences of people who are menstruators and understand what they're going through, what they're experiencing. But don't be too harsh. Don't feel like it's black or white. No, it's red. It's red. That's no pun intended, but it's red.
It really is red.
Um, so I think it really for me is a matter of inclusivity because the implications, especially the health implications when we label it just as menstruation as a woman and girls thing is especially when menstruators want to visit healthcare services and someone is like, but you're not presenting as a woman or a girl, but you're menstruating. How's that possible? We want to remove those barriers, and we also want to remove the discrimination, right? So
Right.
it's really a matter of inclusivity. That's what it's about. Yeah.
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 So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about as the terms around gender, menstruator, female, male, girls, women, and I'm thinking about what other things, as you continue to do the work, have you found in terms of academia as well as the health
Mm.
system? What are some of the biggest issues that exist there in terms of being able to articulate access for people who are gender diverse, or for people who come from different places who may not have immediate access to menstrual wear? So, what are the research things that you've picked up and you've gone, how? I can't believe someone wrote that. Or some of the things in the health system that you've perceived and you were like, hey, well, how do we still have those things in existence?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Look, the research is very fascinating because right now it's looking at more intervention research to say if we go to a school in rural Kenya and we provide girls whatever menstrual product that they require, what is the impact on the attendance, right? And
Right.
that is a really good intervention because you need to realize that period poverty has a direct impact on the girl child's ability to go to school. But when we start to then leave the school setting, period poverty still exists in the home. It still exists at work. It still exists wherever you go, and then it needs to speak to a societal issue and not just a schooling issue. So the
Yeah.
research right now is very focused on the interventions around education and ensuring that uh, girl children in particular, or menstruators, young menstruators, have period positive enabling environments that allow them to still be productive at school whilst menstruating. But now, when we move into sort of the workplace sector, it's very touch and go because there's a lot of pushback on the implementation of menstrual leave, purely because of the stigma issues that exists there. Although there is more of a sort of trend that corporates are taking wellness into consideration purely because of what the impact that COVID had. There's still a
Yeah.
hesitation to speak openly about periods in the workplace, and there's still a hesitation in particular to implement these period positive workplaces. And I think, again, the research comes from the West in terms of really seeing what the form of attendance is. There's been an uptake, especially in a lot of Western organizations, by an organization called Period Positive Workplaces that's headed up by, I think her name is Jessica Strait. She's really incredible in terms of ensuring that there's accessibility and activism within the workplace. But what their research has shown is that workplaces that have taken a more period positive stance and have included period products or vending machines or access to healthcare in the workspace have seen an uptake in productivity, right? Especially with
Yeah.
menstruating employees. So that's really interesting. And this is all, again, being done by the West for the West. We're not really seeing a lot of interventions here in Africa, which is really sad and unfortunate. Um, and then from a healthcare perspective, I think there is a lot of stigma and taboo around the access to these services purely based on the misconceptions a person will think that a healthcare practitioner will have when they want to have access to birth control, contraceptives. Uh, that's also holding them back. But then there's also a lack of education and understanding your menstrual cycle and what that means for yourself to then know when you need to seek help, right? So the point that I'm trying to just showcase to the listeners here is that I've touched on quite a number of issue like touch points in terms of, so it's an education issue, it's a sanitation issue, it's a workplace issue, it's a
Yes.
healthcare issue. And so when
Yeah.
we're talking about the conversations around menstrual health or period poverty, we can't just focus on access to pads means period poverty is solved, because
Yeah.
that is not even, that's like you're just barely scratching the surface, right? Like we need to dive deeper. So yeah, the research is vast, but for me what I've realized, especially doing my PhD, is that it's also Western, which is
Deeply.
a
Deeply.
problem, right? The collaboration that takes place between organizations in the West that are able to get funding, that are able to really pour into this, um, it needs to be changed, I think, because the issue that also stems from that is that then period poverty starts to be depicted as just an African
African
girl
thing.
child issue. But we know that period poverty exists in the UK. We know period poverty exists in the United States. We know
Yeah.
that period poverty exists in these high income countries, but yet researchers will take the opportunity to depict it as an African girl child issue by deliberately only doing these intervention studies in rural areas. So again, that for me, it's not to say that these studies shouldn't be done, but I'm just also trying to say let's have a little bit more inclusivity with the research as well. And that's why I'm always fascinated at just when the West is prioritized, the innovations that come up. Like the other day, I saw something on LinkedIn where a lady had created a pad we can tell you whether you have a condition and you connect it. I don't know how you connect it. I just read it and I was like, this is fascinating. But if we had to get something like this here, the issue to access the internet, like things like that. But it again, it just shows,
It's a layered thing. You can't here. You can't just go at a well. What does innovation look like? I'm also of the mind that, as you're speaking, I'm also of the mind that we really need a lot more ingenuity than innovation for
yeah,
ourselves, because there's quite a lot of things that exist that haven't really been tested but have been cast aside because there's almost like a ready idea of what this thing should look like and sound like, to a point where you don't even explore what is existing and how you can then polish it so that it's accessible and it's still in community. That thing that you were saying about it's not just a school thing, so communities can actually do that for themselves. And I use the word community with the greatest amount of reservation because in my mind's eye, that word on its own speaks to a
yeah,
very specific demographic of people. But I remember that an organization called Gateway Health, and they were doing work in Limpopo in South Africa, and they were exploring banana leaves as something that can be used to make an organic pad, right?
yes,
And banana leaves are abundantly available as a fiber, particularly in that province. And people had started doing the work of trying to figure out how to make pads out of them. But because there is no investment in
yes,
ingenuity and testing, and in actual fact, the body that tests in South Africa gave I don't know where they are in the process, really hard time to actually figure out if this thing can be sold, then means that the West will always have access to these wonderful things, well, thought
yeah,
to be wonderful, innovative
yeah,
things. But here in Africa, we then still have to pass all these things, but the are bodies that are authorized to see things through don't give us leeway to do that. And generally, people
yeah.
who are innovating don't have access to funds to continue.
Because I mean, I understand why they have to regulate, menstrual health products to ensure that we're not experiencing like cases of toxic shock syndrome or people just,
Yes.
I totally get that. But I think from my conversations with a lot of local period product owners is it really is a lot of red tape and it's a really cumbersome process to ensure that your organic pad or your reusable pad passes the mark to be sold in stores or passes the mark to be distributed in communities for goodwill. And it's tricky, and you often then hear of cases where a lot of funding will go into organizations that white label their products. They'll showcase that they have a factory, and then no one is actually making these products. So again, I think within the menstrual health space, because I wouldn't say because it's new, but the conversations around menstrual health or period poverty started to stem with former President Jacob Zuma speaking about this needs to be eradicated. And then that just caused a lot of sort of progress in the removal of VAT on period products, the removal of luxury tax on period products, then having the conversation about, okay, how do we as a country step up from a policy perspective and implementing that? But you're not having your accountability officers within either these departments or hiring them externally to say, okay, we need to have a stakeholder, a network engagement of all of our local period product organizations. We need to understand the challenges, the gaps for opportunities there. Then we need to have a conversation. There's nothing there. It's there. I don't know if that makes sense. It's almost like a vision board, where we're manifesting that this will be done, but it
Yeah.
requires stakeholder engagement, it requires collaboration, but it also
Yeah.
requires intention and effort to implement these things, right? So I think it's yeah, there's definitely a lot of pushback that local period product owners feel because they, on the one hand, have that like you mentioned, that willingness, that passion and drive to make
Yeah,
change. But then if there's no funding, they're not being met halfway.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
diff- it's
tough.
and for me that frames the systemic issues that exist when we're talking about period
Mm,
poverty. And I
mm,
wanted to kind of come back to the body. Because when we're
sure.
speaking about menstruation, it all just go to the red. And I really just
Yes.
want you to walk us through what a menstruator actually goes through in the
Mm,
menstrual cycle. Because it's
cycle.
not just the
Mm,
period blood or period
mm,
matter. The
mm.
entire cycle, in actual fact, is the thing that we're trying to spotlight.
Yeah. There is a really important difference that often people tend to get confused when someone's like, "Oh, I'm on my cycle." Then I go, "Which day?" They go, "Oh, I'm on day 3 or day 4," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm like, okay, so you're on your period." They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, okay, but do you know that your period is a part of your cycle?
The cycle.
Because I'm on day 14 of my cycle. I'm on my cycle right now. We're all on our cycle, but it's
The
on different
cycle
days.
never ends.
It never ends. It's different days that mean different things, right?
Right.
So you have 4 phases of the cycle. And
Right.
ultimately, what the cycle is doing is it's preparing this wonderful thing called the ovum, which is also known as the egg, in preparation for fertilization, right?
Right.
If fertilization doesn't take place, then that egg with the uterine lining gets really thick. And if there's no fertilization, it shrivels and becomes your period. So there's
Right.
different phases, right? So you have your period as the first phase. That's what begins the menstrual cycle. Then you enter into your follicular phase. So that's when these tiny little follicles are forming to create that egg. Then you have your ovulation. So that's when the egg is going on its
Wait,
long
before
road.
you wait. Go back to the follicular. What does the follicular phase feel like in my body, in my mind?
That
What's going
the follicular
on?
phase is it's a great time to socialize. Energies are high. You're just like you're glowing. Like I always tend to have like my engagements during my follicular phase. I also love
I'm
to have my
here right
orgasm.
now as we speak.
Yeah, yeah. And when I get that notification that follicular phase is done, and you're entering into your ovulation, and then when ovulation is done, I know with ovulation is the time of just it's a roller coaster because hormones are fluctuating. So ultimately, you're going to be feeling like, okay, I'm okay, but I can feel that I'm not my usual self. I'm not my productive self as I was in my follicular phase. As soon as ovulation is ending, you're about to enter your luteal phase, which is also known as PMS. Now, that's the one where I really do classify it as a time where you want to just spend time with yourself. Socialization shouldn't take, like, not as much socialization should be taking place here because you really just want to be within yourself. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you want to be that little
Yeah.
kangaroo in the kangaroo pouch. You just want to re-energize, you want to reset. If you are someone who loves working out, like you're not doing your high intensity activity work, you're just, you're taking it easy. And then from luteal, you enter into your period, right? So it's different phases of the cycle that I think we often don't really understand how it has
Yeah.
an impact on our ability to function and our ability to be productive. And this is why I get so frustrated when people are like, "Oh, she's moody, she must be on her period," or "Oh, she's moody, she's PMSing." It's like whether I'm PMSing on my period, my feelings are valid, but I also think like we need to understand that our cycle really does have an impact on how we feel and how we view the world. And therefore, we need to be very proactive in the things that we do and how we
Right.
prepare ourselves for that. So it's not to say like we have anything negative or bad. I don't want people to feel that way, but I want us to be more liberated and empowered in the fact that we can be in sync with our cycles and we can really optimize the best way in terms of knowing that okay, this week I know or next week I know is my PMS phase. So I'm not going to have as many interviews. I'm not going to have as many face-to-face meetings, but this is going to be the week where I actually prioritize my admin, or I prioritize, writing, because it's just me and me, right? And then as soon as I enter my follicular phase and I'm follicular and ovulation, and I know that's my peak time, I can go out, I can do
Work, work,
swell, I
work.
can. That's where you work. So I think that's really important for people to understand the different phases of the cycle. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for that. It's so important to just realize that none of it is linear. And I
Mm,
wanted to also spotlight, just as you were speaking about PMS, something that generally isn't, or maybe we don't speak enough about, which is
mm,
PMDD. So, not
mm.
just premenstrual syndrome, but actually premenstrual depression, right? Like
Yeah,
deeply depressed with really mental struggle until you get to into your period, and sometimes even during your period. And I wanted us to
yeah.
have just like a brief conversation around what
Okay.
support exists and what does this thing look like, and how does one
Mhm.
get to a point where they understand that for them this is a thing. So I know
Yeah.
we say it's just PMS, but I don't think that there's anything that's just PMS. It's such a big
No.
thing to happen. When you get to a
Yeah.
point where there's depression before your period, then
Mm,
it's rather complex. So I just wanted to ask
mm.
you around how what support looks like for someone who goes into a depression, but also what does this thing feel like in your body?
So PMDD is not spoken enough about because there are quite a number of people that I know that have PMDD. So the official term for it is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So ultimately, it is your body is sensitive, really sensitive to the hormonal
Yeah.
fluctuations that are taking place, right? So when we're having PMS, we might notice, okay, yeah, my breasts are tendon sore. Oh, the bloating is there. Or I'm having the cravings, or I'm feeling, yeah, like really moody and I just want to cry. But with PMDD, it's those symptoms times 1,000, right? Where you
Oh.
are so sensitive to any single thing. And a lot of people with PMDD also associated with that severe depression, right? And I'm speaking depression to the extent where you really don't see any hope for life, right? So suicidal
Right.
ideation is at a peak here. And
Yeah.
that for me is really concerning because the support that someone might not have, and them also having the lack of access to menstrual education, they would really then come to the conclusion that, something is really wrong with me. And if they're in a situation where they feel that life's not working out for them, it can cause really intense, severe suicidal thoughts. And as
Yeah.
soon as their period is about to start, or their period starts, then they go, oh, so that's what that
Oh.
was, right? And then they keep it moving. And what I find to be very helpful is, again, tracking your cycle and really journaling your symptoms to say, I've just entered into this phase where I really feel hopeless. I'm withdrawing. I don't want to socialize, but I'm feeling these feelings so intensely. I don't know what to do. And then prioritizing yourself is very, very, very important. Because I know there are a lot of people who, like me, are programmed to just work like a hamster and just like keep going, keep going, keep
Keep
going.
going. Yeah.
But you really need to have that perspective and mindset that if you are not your best self, you are not going to be best at your work. If you're not your
Yeah.
best self, you're not going to be the best partner. If you're not your best self, you're not going to be, it can like spill into so many
Spill to other
things. So
places. Yeah.
there's so many recommendations and suggestions on how to handle PMDD. People say this is a time where you have to prioritize um, vitamin D, being in the sun, walking, some light exercise. This is a time where you really have to prioritize watching what you eat, prioritize who you surround yourself with. Like if there's anyone in particular that's triggering you, you don't want to be around that. But
Yeah.
I think there needs to be more support in terms of research. I think there also needs to be more interventions, especially from a medical point of view, that allows for um, I don't know if there's like I wouldn't even call it a placebo, but if there's a way that I don't always have to rely on eating chocolate, but I can pop like a very natural pill that helps with my serotonin and my endorphins, let's go for
Yeah,
it, right? If
get
that really
access
means
to
that it's
that.
going to save my life, then let's go for it. So yeah, the support there I think is much needed. From what I've been seeing, it's people don't speak enough about it. They
Yeah.
really don't.
A friend of mine would say that she would go through it every month, and then she'd
Mm.
go through her period. As soon as her period starts, then she feels better, and then after the fact, it's the phases, and then she comes back to it. And she says every single time it got me, because every single time I didn't recognize it. It's like having
Yeah,
PMS. You're constantly
yeah,
shocked, like, hey, well, what's going
yeah.
on now? And and
Mm.
so I think I wanted to also ask you around, if I don't have an app, what are some of the ways I can track my period so that I can
Mm.
almost calendar and be able to anticipate that, I might, it's coming towards the end of my ovulation phase. I'm probably going to need support, and so kind of have things in place around that time,
Yeah.
almost as uh, as clockwork. How do I track
Mm.
that if I don't have
Mm.
access to apps?
Mm. A calendar, like you can easily get any journal that has like a month to month,
Yeah.
like your life planners, and simply just take like a pink highlighter. Like to start off, take a pink highlighter when you're menstruating, to signify, okay, I've been menstruating for 7 days. And then also in each block, write what you're feeling. What is there anything that profound that happened for you today that has an impact on how you're relating to the rest of the world? Like you can write, like I'm happy, I'm sad. Then also write if there's anything specifically that you're craving. Like write those in those
That
specific
is so
things that
hilarious,
like
because there's this app on my phone, right, that says
yeah.
um track your feelings, and I'm like, girl, why?
Track your feelings.
I'm like, track your, how are you feeling today? Sad. Are you alone or with your family? I'm with my family. How bad is it? Too many questions is how bad it is. But now what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say is that that's important, because if there's
Yeah.
repetition, then maybe something's going on around this time that I need
Yeah.
to be concerning myself with.
But it also allows you to know what's regular and what's irregular, right? Because when you
Mm,
do visit a gynae, call it a gynae if you have the privilege and the opportunity to, because gynaes are expensive.
yeah.
Your gynae will ask you, what have the past 3 cycles been like? Now, if you're
Yeah,
going,
girl, I don't know.
I don't know. You see how helpful it is to constantly be asked like the same questions. So at least when you go to your gynae or your medical provider and they go, okay, so what's happening? You can go, okay, so for the past 3 months, I've been experiencing this type of flow. I've been feeling this type of way. But what's been irregular is this. And I'm worried because I've never experienced it. That's what's important about tracking your cycle. So with your calendar, you can really just start off with the days that you started menstruating and highlighting that. Then
Yeah.
as soon as you know you've done menstruating, you know that now you're going into the phase of the egg is being developed, right? But then being mindful of the physical symptoms in that is taking place. So
Oh,
usually
okay.
with ovulation, right? So follicular phase, that's you're peaking. There's nothing really happening from a symptom point of view. But when you enter into ovulation, a clear sign is that clear, thick discharge that you'll see, right?
Right.
And people will be like, oh, what is this? Is this normal? That is fine. It's totally fine. It's like a jelly type substance. So long as it doesn't have a smell, you're all good. That's when you know, okay, I'm going back to my period diary. I had my period
Another
2
thing
weeks
about ovulation that I need to spotlight as
Yeah.
a person who cares about your pleasure is that your body is
Yeah.
ripe for the picking, okay? So there are feelings like you're feeling very sensual, very
Yeah.
like your libido level also is heightened. Your body's trying to
Yeah.
fool you into some stuff. Anyway, but you're
I
feeling
start
very
seeing people.
virile, and like,
Yeah.
you can get it. It's
Yeah.
cute. I mean, I wouldn't
I start
mind getting
seeing
some.
I start seeing people that I usually don't really see in that way going, oh, today you look
Mm,
cute. in that soup.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, it must be because I'm ovulating. Yeah, like it really does change. Like we really are not joking when we're saying our hormones govern us. They govern how we
Yes.
feel, what we say. So that is just again with your diary, making sure that you are mindful of that. You go, hey, bro,
Yeah.
today a guy called John Smith. I never used to look John Smith like I never used to like John Smith, but today John Smith came
Suddenly.
here. And you're like, oh, I'm ovulating. That's literally the case. So I think it can be done. I think it's not something that requires a smartphone,
Yeah.
but it also is a matter of creating the habit of constantly always just going into okay, what's happening. And if you can start with doing simple things like in the beginning of the week, I'm on my period diary, and at the end of the week, I'm reflecting. That is enough. Because I always say this, you are your biggest advocate. No one can advocate for your body and your menstrual cycle other than you because you are the one that's experiencing it. So when you go to a doctor and you're just there like, yo, doc, I don't know what's going on, and the doc's like, tell me, and there's nothing you can tell,
Yeah.
that's a concern. That's a problem. So it really is, I think, super important that people realize that we don't need to have the smartest technology or anything really intense, but it is about intention. It is about really saying, I'm going to advocate for myself and empower myself. And it can really just be through a diary, honestly. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. We're our own biggest advocates, and if we're not
Mm,
checking in with ourselves consistently, we can't expect a medical professional to just suddenly know what's happening with us. We need to be
mm,
intentional about making sure that we're okay. Now,
mm.
questions about cultures, because I mean, we care about diverse thinking, right? Or even just like your experiences of what you've been able to see as you do the work. Are there any things that you were like, oh, this is odd behavior? It's odd, but it works. Or you've seen and you're like, well, this is interesting from different parts of the world, where, because, you know, there's before you even answer this question, there is one thing that I
Yeah.
truly regret
Okay.
saying. Because now that I think about it, some practices are really, really critical. And part of the
Yeah.
practices, without discrimination or sidelining, was when women are going through their period to take time and rest. And
Yeah.
I understand to some extent it was because there was no appropriate period wear that was safe. So people were free to bleed, literally, and so they needed
Mm,
space to be free to bleed. But there's something I appreciate by the fact that you could take 7 days off and go sit in a hut and be served food and live your life while you bleed. We don't have
mm,
that. We have to advocate for period
mm, mm,
leave. And I thought
mm,
that I think when
mm,
I think about it, I'm just like, because of how the world moves and how the West moves, some of these things were
mm,
taken and people were then oppressed and they couldn't then function in their societies. But there was reason for the madness. Go take the time, chill in the hut. We will serve you while you are busy bleeding. So, what are some
yeah.
of the things that you've seen where you're like, yay? And some of the things where you're like, okay.
Well, yeah, I think it's really interesting how we've had this transition from menstruation being celebrated, especially in pre-agrarian cultures,
Yeah.
um, where you saw like the a celebration of one's first period. And
Yeah.
then also every time it came consistently, because how people were tracking their period was through the moon, right? That
You
was that
get.
was how people were able to determine. And so when your period is coming regularly, people were like, okay, this means this person is fertile, and that is a sign of good health, and that
Yeah.
needs to be celebrated.
Yeah.
I think when religion entered the chat and started speaking about um, menstruators being considered impure and that they should not enter a place of worship, um, then that gets sort of misconstrued to what then they should be doing during that time. I've always had fascinating conversation with religious leaders where I'm like, okay, so I'm a Catholic. Leviticus says I can't go to the church on my period, but Why is that? Why? I know you talk about impurity and not entering the temple, but what should I be doing if I'm not at church on my period? They're like, you should be resting. And I'm like, okay. So why isn't that mentioned, or why is that not actually articulated by religious leaders
Yeah.
to say, we are giving you the option to say, yes, we know that going to church every Sunday is important, but if you are menstruating, you have the option to rest, right?
Rest. That
And
should be the
instead,
essentialized thing, right?
that should be the
It's like this
thing.
is your
But instead,
period of rest.
exactly, but it's taken as no, you're dirty, you're impure, and therefore you need to stay away. And some then religions have taken as you, as the wife, will sleep on the floor, or you'll sleep in a separate bedroom, or you have to like it's just it's been misconstrued in such a very toxic way. I think even the idea of having period rest, especially in like certain cultures and societies where they really do like when I say they banish young girls into menstrual huts, people go, oh, but the menstrual huts must be nice, it should be like an Airbnb. No, it's not.
It's
It's
not.
really like a human rights implication. It's an issue of dignity. And then you as a young girl are then associating a period with this negative thing. Like, I'm bleeding, now I'm being banished far away from my family, and now I have to just take care and fend for myself. Like, that should not be the
Baba.
association. I think we would all be happy to be given the option to have a staycation in a nice hotel room, and we're just being given snacks and everything. And then people start having these conversations like you're taking advantage or whatever. But the reality is that we are meant to be resting on our period. When
Yeah.
blood is being shed from our uterine lining and nutrients and essentials are being removed from our body, we need to be able to replenish ourselves, right? So we're not saying give us like a luxury getaway every month, but we are saying give us the opportunity to choose whether we want to go to church, whether we want to rest, whether we want to go to work, whether we want to rest from home and still work, whether we want, like, give us the agency to choose.
Yeah.
So for me, I think the craziest thing that I've really encountered just from like a cultural point of view is really just this association that our blood is dirty, and as a
Dirty.
result we are therefore dirty. I'm like, okay, if my egg was fertilized and I didn't go through the period, right? The same egg that is being with the uterine lining and is now fertilized and becoming a baby, if it wasn't fertilized, is the same egg that dissolves, becomes menstrual blood. So how is it dirty?
When
If
did it
I was
become dirty?
When did it become dirty?
Yeah.
If we all had dirty uterine linings, we would be very sick. That's how beautiful the body is. That's how beautiful our anatomy is in understanding what's for us and what's not for us. So you saying menstrual blood is dirty implies that I'm unhealthy, and that's not okay
That's not a
because
real
I'm fine.
thing.
I'm fine. So I think that's just been the one that I'm always scratching my head about. Like, guys, let's think. Let's just think.
I know it's
Yeah,
hard, but let's
yeah,
think.
just a bit.
Okay. So, speaking about menstrual blood being dirty and everyone kind of thinking that once you are on your actual period, then you should essentially
Mm,
go to Banishment Island.
mm,
Period sex.
yeah.
Period sex as support for people who are menstruating. When I say support, I mean for pain, for comfort,
Mhm, mhm.
for shift in mood. What's going on there? Like, if people think that periods are dirty, what about period sex? What are people's attitudes towards period sex?
Yeah. It's always so crazy to me. Like how whether I come across something on Twitter, I still call it Twitter. Yes, you can try and find me, Elon. You can catch me outside. I still call it Twitter. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Anyway, at Twitter is just how people are like, oh, I'm gonna go on a vacation and I need something to skip my period. What can I do? And you'll hear people go, oh, try apple cider vinegar. or maybe try period six.
Hey!
And then I'm always that girly. I'm always that girly that will quote and be like, or you could just try period six. Like
It seems like
that's
such an obvious thing, but it's
you know,
clearly not.
it's clearly not because there is again that misconception of period blood is dirty and it's impure. And I think the funniest thing I ever came across is when someone was asking me like, okay, so if the period blood goes on my partner's like phallus, what 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 must I do? Like, will it fall off? Do you
Fall off.
think that this
What is it? Acid?
like that's what I'm saying? Like,
Are we bleeding acid because our uteruses should have fallen off a while back?
you know, and and the thing is, my first response is always to laugh, but then I go, but you know what? This again just shows the necessity of menstrual
Yeah,
education and what's
yeah.
really needed. But I always just do this. I always say, look, there are more benefits to period sex than there are worries and concerns about what will happen to your partner. I feel that if you have a partner that is supportive and caring and wants to see you at ease and have comfort, really understand that if you do engage in period sex, you actually have the advantage of a lighter flow, your cramps lessen. There's symptoms that just are like that ease off because if you do orgasm, it releases that happy hormone and you feel better, right?
Yeah,
What is a
yeah.
bit more different though is that there's a little bit more prep work when it comes to period sex. So you might want to be a little bit more creative in saying, okay, we can't just go on the sheets, we're probably going to have to put that red blankie on. Or, you know, if we want to do it in the
Team,
shower,
lay the towel.
well, team
Lay the
later, or
towel.
we have to think about something different. Um, like just yeah, being more creative. And I think in that sense, it's also creating a deepening form of intimacy and
Yeah.
connection with your partner. Because now you're bringing on flow to the bedroom, and it's like, whoa, okay. So it's really exciting. I think when I am always showcasing the benefits and the advantages of period sex, and I always just say like, if you feel so negatively about your period when you are under your period and there's no period sex, how are you showcasing that to your partner? Like, do you not want to have a partner that's supportive, that cares for you, that is giving you all of the things that you require? Or like, what is it? Like, just tell me, like, you know, what is it that you require in your period in terms of support and care? And then showcase that to your partner because I'm sure they'll gladly help. If they won't help, they think your period's disgusting, then please dispose of them like you would dispose your pad or tampon.
The pad, yeah,
In
tampon.
so I just
Period.
think it's really
Period.
important. Yeah, period. I think it's just really important that we have these conversations more openly and just
Yeah.
also people who have engaged in it are always like, this has been really incredible. I don't do it on my heaviest day. I tend to prefer like light medium day. Because on
Yeah.
my heavy day I honestly just want to be a sloth and not move. But I've at least tried it to know that the benefits actually are true and they
Yeah,
work.
true.
So I really feel that it's a matter of education. It's a matter of also unlearning the misconceptions that you have to then just progress forward and flow forward, you know?
Flo- Okay, and that's on period. And one layer I wanted to add was that in an event when you are having period sex and
Mm,
you are not you haven't had other conversations about what's happening in your relationship, it's really, really critical to
mm.
put that condom on. If you're worried about period blood going into your partner's penis, put a condom on. There is a lot. The prep work, part of the prep work is just like, we are laying a towel, we're putting on our condoms, we're doing whatever we need to do to feel comfortable and enjoy this
Yep.
thing. So, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable and enjoy this physical contact and be at ease, do that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, most importantly, protect yourself. As
Yeah.
we are wrapping it up, I wanted to ask
Mm,
you, what are the things that you think or you've observed that we are not speaking about when we're speaking about menstrual poverty, systemic
mm,
access to menstrual wear across the board, and just attitudes that we have when it comes menstruation, and then fundamentally periods.
Sure, it's there's a lot. I feel like there is so much, and I think like with in particular with South Africa, we are just focusing on period poverty and the impact that it has on girl child's ability to go to school. But it, again, like I'd mentioned earlier, it's layered. It's more intersectional. There's a there's a race, class, gender, sexuality,
Mm,
ability issue that's connected to menstrual health. I mean, we barely even have conversations about people with disabilities
yes.
and their menstrual experiences. I think there was it's been for 2 years now. We've been hosting workshops at um, a school in Remsig, and we get feedback from the teachers that say, the girls don't menstruate because the girls have to be put on injections, and these are young primary school girls, purely because they won't be able to take care of themselves during their period. So they start these injections as early as 8.
Oh
And these are things
no.
that you start now thinking like if we had to be having open conversations about agency and choice, like what in in this context, what do you do? Like there's still more light to be shown on on period poverty, and in particular the taboo of it. I I really one thing I wish for is that we move towards a space of enlightenment and empowerment that then allows us to really put the walls down and find intersectional and holistic solutions. Because the
Yeah.
thing is, I think the work that is fascinating about resolving period poverty is that a one size fits all approach can't work, especially if we all have different period experiences. So, yes, we are lobbying for the fact that period products, access to period products should be free or readily accessible. But not everyone is comfortable using a pad because they might experience itchiness. Not everyone is comfortable using a tampon because, there's that cultural element of will it break my virginity or will it make me impure? So again, it's layered and more work needs to be done, but always ensuring that there is the opportunity for agency,
Yeah.
um, so important. So look, I think because I'm doing my PhD on this, I could go into a whole different conversation about
You know,
menstrual health and what is needed. But I think right now, in order for us to really be effective in the work that government is doing, effective in the work that different organizations are doing, it is really starting at a place of empowerment of thyself to therefore empower others, especially the others that hold the power, the decision makers, to really change what needs to be done. Because right now, it's really just scratching the surface. We're just focusing on how do we ensure that girls go to school on their period.
yeah.
Great, but more needs to be done. There's an
You know,
environmental
as
issue that we
you're
haven't even tackled. Mm,
as you're speaking, I'm thinking to myself, there is cause, and that's the thing about that you're saying about, there's no blanket. You can start at a point, but there's no
mm,
blanket solve, right?
mm,
And I'm thinking about the fact that as we're having this conversation, I didn't in my mind's eye, I hadn't even thought about what it looks like. And as someone who's worked with organizations that have menstruators with disabilities and kind of
mm,
supported it, there is cause for that conversation to be front and center, that intersection to be front and center, for us to foreground it so that even when people are thinking about support, they really are thinking about how do we show up meaningfully, even
mm,
for particularly for that area of advocacy, so that young ones are not getting pumped full of hormones because
mm,
someone is thinking, I don't know how to meaningfully support this person to be able to do the work of wearing period wear themselves or understand
mm,
what this works and how this works. And yeah, like my mind right now is on the mill on some how do we then that intersection bring it to the center for us to say, hey, it's not just, I get the itch from tampons, right? But I'm someone who has agency to say, I'll do cups for the first 2 days, and then I'll do this for this day, and I'll do this. But for someone who has a disability, and it's on the spectrum depending on how severe it is, how do we make sure that they're also supported, but they have a bit of agency as well? So thank you
Yeah.
for that, because now you have, yay, yeah, ne. Yo. Okay, anyway. Oh my gosh. Um, and so I suppose mine is to say, in closing, um, systemically, and as a people who are deeply interested in making sure that we're not little poor Africans, and little poor women, and little poor queers, and little poor people with disabilities who want to really find a way to support one another, to go to school, take time off work, and choose for ourselves. What are the things that you want to say to us and the system when it comes to menstruation and period poverty?
Um, sure. I think there's definitely a lot that needs to be said when it comes to just realizing the power of speaking openly around menstrual health.
Wait, before you
I
carry on, Candice, because I'm actually realizing there are some tools that you've got online for people who don't necessarily connect well
mm,
with this topic, and who are people who are cisgendered men, who
mm,
can't fathom it. Like, you do these simulations, and
yes,
so please make sure that when you're plugging us with that too, because I think those are such incredible ways for people to be able to experience differently or see differently this
yeah.
idea of menstruation and periods.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always a matter of being intentional, of not only leaving the responsibility of period poverty to be resolved on just the woman and girl and menstruator, but also to realize that men and boys play responsibility, in particular, fathers to menstruators.
Yeah.
Curate launched a campaign called Dads for Pads, and people can access that on our website, www.curate.org.za/dads for pads. Um, and there's an easy guide for dads to start the conversation, know more about menstrual health. But there's also a petition, right, for dads to be saying, we as fathers are lobbying together to say this needs to come to an end. It's nonsensical that our menstruating children have to be impacted by something that can be easily solvable in terms of the period product access level. But I feel one thing in terms of just like how we start, I guess, in answering your question was just how do we envision a period positive society? And for me, a period positive society is where people feel, I don't even want to say the word comfortable, but empowered enough, confident, speak openly
Yeah.
about mental health, no matter the setting. It's not a thing of like, oh yeah, I'm feeling sick and I need to. No, you can say, guys, today I'm on day 3. My cramps are killing me, and I
Yeah.
can't show up the way I want to, but I can show up in a different way, right? Like I think it's really critical to understand the power of talking openly about our periods, and in a way that obviously respects the environments that you're in, but also in a way that encourages others to feel empowered enough to do the same.
Yeah.
I really wish that, yeah, like my overall goal in life is to ensure that there are not any 10-year-old Candices that went through the experience that I went through, that when they start their period they already know what it is because they've already had those conversations, they've already been empowered enough, they've got the access to the services they require, and they go, oh, my period started today, great. Like that sense of confidence is so important rather than just coming from a place of fear. And
Yeah.
I that's just one thing I feel needs to be done. Because if we're talking openly about periods, then it also means our policymakers, our decision makers are talking openly about periods. That means that they prioritizing menstrual health as projects or menstrual health as issues of concern when it comes to inclusivity and policy making. Like it has a major effect when we speak openly about menstrual health. And yeah, we can't just leave it on Eve's Apple team or the Minister of Menstruation or the Curate team. Like everyone needs to speak about this. So that I think is the answer I would have. Mm.
Uh, Everybody, the minister has spoken. We need to
Yeah.
move from a place of fear to a place of comfort so that
Mm-hmm.
when we're comfortable, nobody feels like any conversation about menstrual health sidelines them or makes them feel some type of way. We need to get to a place where everybody is free to bleed. Okay? That's literally what the minister just said. So it's a wrap. Had some laughs. We've had some uncomfortable moments. We've shocked you a little bit. But if you are
Yep.
enjoying our content, please follow us on Eve's Apple the Mac across all social media platforms. And you will find us on Spotify as Eve's Apple Radio as well as YouTube as Eve's Apple Radio. And this was our first episode. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Period.
Good. Yay! That was great. I am staying on
Oh,
because it needs to be uploaded, I think.
yes. Thank you so
How are you
much.
feeling? That was really
Feels so
good.
good. It feels so good.